Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. Boom and Bust welcomes back to the program Dr. Leslyn Lewis, who is a member of Parliament for Haldimand Norfolk and a candidate for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. We'll talk about her policies and plans as this leadership race heats up. Welcome back to the program, Leslyn.
Thank you for having me again, Tony.
Well, you're running again for leader, so maybe you could just give our viewers a little bit of an introduction to yourself and why you've decided to run again.
Well, as you know, I ran in 2020 and I did well. I was able to get the popular vote on the second ballot, and that was really as a relative unknown. And so I decided to focus on a lot of the issues that I focused on in 2020, and that was basically uniting the country and starting from the perspective of uniting the party, making sure that every sector of our party has a voice, whether you're a social conservative, a progressive conservative, a libertarian, or a fiscal conservative. We need to unite because we represent a microcosm of what Canadian society looks like. And I think if we can unite and form strong policies, we can lead the country.
Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the themes that you're communicating as a leadership candidate?
Sure. So the economy is something that's very big. I think that we need to get our economy in order. We need to deal with the carbon tax, which I would eliminate the carbon tax. We also need to do this while we're maintaining a environmentally sustainable practices. And so I don't see the environment as mutually exclusive from economic development. And so I'd like to have policies that highlight both those strengths, protecting the environment while growing our economy.
So let's talk a little bit more about, I guess, the woes that Canadians are suffering through right now. I'm sure on the campaign trail you've heard stories from people who are going through some tough times, whether it's inflation, cost of living, housing prices, all of these things are impacting. So tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on these kinds of issues.
Well, all of the above. The average person is complaining about even if they own their own home, there are things that are impacting on them, such as cost of increase in heat, hydro, food costs. This is extremely exacerbated for people who are on fixed incomes, like people who are on disability and pensioners. So housing affordability, not just housing, is a real important issue. As I said again, the carbon tax is also an important issue. There are also people who were let off of work because of their medical choice. And so with the announcement yesterday, eliminating the mandates and returning a lot of federal workers to their source of employment, that will also alleviate some of the pressures that that sector specifically felt. So there are many people who were laid off because of choices that they made. And also with the economy, that because of COVID many companies closed down. I've spoken to people all over the country who, for example, small business owners who had a very difficult time, restaurants who had a difficult time finding people to work. And some of them even had to do the drastic thing, Tony, of shutting down a few days a week, not because they didn't have the clientele. They had the clientele, but they didn't have the workforce in order to get the work done. And I've seen that in restaurants, I've seen that in industries, in manufacturing sector. And so we need to make sure that we have the ability to get people back to work, to retrain them, to have retraining programs, and to fill that void that we have within the workplace.
Is the federal government doing anything in these areas right now?
Well, there is talk about bringing in skilled trade workers and meeting with employers to find out what these needs are. My immigration policies are more focused on making sure that we meet the needs of Canadians. I think it's very important that we craft policies around that. And so we have to look to fill those voids. Even in the riding that I live in, COVID was really catastrophic. And many of the policies altered how they could bring in seasonal farm workers and seasonal agricultural workers.
Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Dr. Leslyn Lewis. She is a member of Parliament and also a candidate for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. Leslyn, it appears that a lot in this country just isn't working, whether it's pipelines, getting pipelines built, or Pearson Airport. It's a little bit of a mess, quite frankly. I would say that probably a lot of the criticism is being directed to the federal Liberal government right now because their inability to get anything done. Is this something that you've heard in your tour around the country as a leadership candidate? And if so, what have you been saying about this?
Absolutely. People are very, very concerned that our economic policies were very, very short-sighted, and especially when it comes to the natural resource sector. When we look at the fact that we have the third largest accessible oil reserves on this planet, and yet we leave that untapped. We also import over 500,000 barrels of oil every single day, largely from dictatorship regimes. We know that in Europe, 40% of their oil is acquired from Russia. We have the capacity to supply the world with our liquefied natural gas. If we had had the foresight to construct pipelines, to get our product to Tidewater, to be able to sell our products abroad, not only would we be repatriating those revenues back to our country, but we would also be helping with diminishing our impact on the environment by selling clean products like liquefied natural gas to countries that have high coal production. So the fact that we weren't able to do that affects not only the environment, but it affects our bottom line. It affects our revenues. And I think it was very, very short-sighted for the Liberals not to consider optimizing one of our greatest strengths like that.
And Pearson Airport, any comments on the chaos there?
Well, a lot of the chaos was due to the fact that people who were vaccinated were being treated like criminals coming into their own countries. They still had to take tests, and the unvaxxed couldn't fly at all. And so we needed to make sure that especially now in the summertime, people are coming here as tourists and they are jumping through hoops in order to meet the demands of our country's travel mandates. And these mandates are not anywhere else in the world. So I do have to say that I'm glad that the Liberals finally were able to change this policy and to do something about the backlog that we see, the clog that we see at the airports. But also there's concern about the Arrive Canada app. That's also slowing things down. Many seniors have complained that they are just not smartphone savvy and that there needs to be an alternate mechanism for them to be able to comply with the Arrive Can app without having it on their phone, which many of them don't have.
Mm-hmm. Just returning to pipelines for a moment, and you talked about liquefied natural gas as well. A lot of these will be of economic boon for our First Nations, our Indigenous peoples, and yet, again, not a lot of action from the federal Liberals. Is this something you're concerned about?
It is, because resource sharing agreements is something that in speaking with First Nations communities, they see this as a way to really address on-reserve poverty and to uplift themselves. They don't want handouts. They want to be able to be partners in development and in resource development. And this is a good opportunity for them to change the dynamics on reserves by eliminating on-reserve poverty. And the fact that the Liberals are not seeing this opportunity means that these reserves are kept stagnant. And it's something that the chiefs on the reserves are very, very interested in engaging in.
And do you think that there could be appropriate partnerships with a lot of these Indigenous reserves?
Oh, there has been, and there will continue to be if the political will is there to do that. And these reserves want to be able to address some of the problems that are keeping them stagnant, such as having clean water. These resource sharing agreements would be able to address that. Internet, the even young people on the reserves are not able to engage in educational programs and vocational programs because of poor internet connectivity. These are things that could be addressed through infrastructural development, which would come from these types of resource sharing agreements.
We're discussing a lot of issues, actually, with Dr. Leslyn Lewis. She's a candidate for the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. We'll be right back with her after this break. Please stay with us. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Dr. Leslyn Lewis. She is a member of Parliament, and she is also a candidate for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. Leslyn, obviously one of the areas where Conservatives seek to do better is in certain urban ridings. I think of Toronto, I think of Montreal, I think of Vancouver, where we haven't, where Conservatives haven't had that historic success in the last 3 election cycles anyway. Do you have plans to sort of tackle urban issues and that disconnect that the party has currently?
I think that what we need to do, Tony, is we actually need to physically get into those areas and to let the people understand that their values are reflected in our party. Many people that live in the urban areas, a lot of them are from immigrant backgrounds, and inherently they share our values. They share conservative values, but we haven't been able to connect with them on a values level to let them know that there's a place within our party for them. And that's some of the work that I intend to do, that I intend to continue to do, because it is a very, very important part of winning the next election.
Are there kind of policy areas? I guess housing would be one of them that springs to mind immediately, because that's an issue everywhere, of course, but particularly in our urban areas. Are these the kinds of things that we would be talking about, or that Conservatives would be talking about rather, when they are seeking to campaign under your leadership?
Absolutely. Housing affordability is something that is very, very pressing for urban areas. It's pressing for all over the country, but specifically in urban areas where the cost of housing has just skyrocketed. And it is an issue of supply. We just do not have enough supply. And although the Liberals said that they intend to build 100,000 homes, I think when you look at the stress on the urban areas, the number needs to probably be closer to 1 million homes. And what we have to do is we have to start looking at the infills. We have a lot of urban spaces too that we just have not developed. In addition, we have a lot of crown lands that is just sitting there that are close to urban areas that we also have not developed. I think we need to incentivize builders to purchase that land. And perhaps what we could do is we could reduce some of the costs for, say, the development costs that would be passed on to the purchasers, so that we can make housing more affordable. We also have to look at making sure that we are optimizing housing, that we have the densities to be able to deal with the high density capacity within the city. So that's a major issue, housing affordability.
Actually, great points. And connected to that, of course, is the Conservative Party's failure over the last, again, 3 election cycles to connect with millennial voters and now Generation Z, Zillennial voters. Do you have any thoughts on your candidacy and how you can connect with those voters as well?
Affordability is big for them. When you speak to them, that's the first thing that comes out of their mouth, that they don't want to continue to live in their parents' basement. They want to have the dream of being able to own a home. They want to be able to fill up their gas tank. And if they don't have a car, they want to be able to have affordable, accessible transportation. And so through transfer payments from the government, from the federal government to provincial government, we can deal with things like infrastructural development that will affect the areas such as transportation, which is big for the millennials. And another issue that's big for them is the environment. And as you know, I have a master's of environmental studies, so I take that area very seriously. And I believe that there are ways that we can improve the environment without a carbon tax. And my policies focus on doing that, largely through enhanced green technology and innovative technology.
Are you getting a sense that these voters, these younger voters, are starting to look for alternatives to the Trudeau Liberals now?
Many of them are, because they don't like the approach of government knows best. Government will tell you what you can watch on the internet. Government will dictate your algorithms. They are more free spirited. And when they see the Liberal government moving into that type of leadership, that type of dogmatic leadership, many of them are questioning whether this is the party that they could align themselves with. And they're finding that they're not. And so they're looking for places that their votes that they could call their home.
We're having a discussion with Dr. Leslyn Lewis. She is a member of Parliament and candidate for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. We're going to have another round of questions for her right after this break, so please stay with us. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Dr. Leslyn Lewis, Member of Parliament and candidate for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. Leslyn, in the past, you've called government, quote, overbearing. And maybe this is on the internet bill and some other things too, but what needs to be done to start dialing back government's role in all of our lives?
Well, government needs to start listening. Government needs to respect the people that elect them. And one perfect example is what we witnessed with the convoy protest earlier on this year. People came from all over the country because they were frustrated, they were alienated. And instead of being listened to, they were called names like racist and misogynist and bigots and Nazis. And it's just inappropriate for a government to respond to citizens in that manner. And it's an arrogance that politicians that we have acquired in thinking that we know best. People have elected us, and we need to listen to the people that elect us because we are their voice. And I have not been seeing that in the last few months, and even the invocation of the Emergency Measures Act, where we had a government confiscate people's property and freeze people's bank accounts because of a protest. And this was done without a court order. That is an overreach. That is an overstep. And we have to return to upholding our Constitution and respecting the constitutional rights of Canadians.
Yeah, that's been certainly that issue about the Emergencies Act, and its implementation has been starting to be covered nationally, but has been a focus on Parliament Hill. Do you think that people are starting to come to the conclusion that the Emergencies Act wasn't necessary in the first place?
Well, the Liberals are saying that the police did not tell them to invoke the Emergencies Act. That's what we're hearing now. We've also seen numerous media outlets backtrack and say that the coverage that they gave during the protest was inaccurate, that there were not acts of sedition, that the Russians were not involved. These are things that were put out there to conjure up fear in Canadians, and so that an extreme type of approach would be adopted. And we saw this extreme approach, and it's going to go down in our history, in our Canadian history, as one of the worst encroachments on civil liberties, when a government has cracked down on largely peaceful protesters and used a measure like the Emergencies Act in order to crack down on dissent. It's something that really, really shows an utter disrespect for our Constitution, our freedom of assembly, our freedom of expression, our freedom of mobility. These rights were encroached upon by the use of the Emergencies Act.
Yes, I suppose yourself as a parliamentarian and also as a lawyer, you're seeing in real time on Parliament Hill the degrading of the rights of citizenry. Is that one of the things that really compelled you to run?
It is because what I'm seeing is that many citizens have a lack of trust in institutions, in the institution of government, in the institution of the media. And this erosion of trust is causing people to become disconnected. Even in our provincial election, 40% turnout rate shows a lack of involvement. And we're seeing that the participation, even in our elections, is decreasing because there is a lack of trust. And so we need to restore faith and confidence in our institutions. And the only way that we can do that is by having mutual respect and upholding the laws and the foundations of this society.
We've got about 30 seconds left. Leslyn, are you optimistic about your chances and the Conservative Party's chances?
Yes, I am very optimistic because our efforts this time have far exceeded what I did in 2020. And so I'm very optimistic about my future in the party. I'm optimistic about this race, and I look forward to working with the other candidates. I think that we have strong candidates. I think, of course, my background, coming from industry and academia and having experience outside of politics, is the strongest background. But I look forward to working with all of the other candidates.
Dr. Leslyn Lewis, thanks for joining us on Boom and Bust, and we wish you every success.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you.